You've got James Comer just issued subpoenas for the Clintons. I mean, this is like entertainment every place I look, and I know my next guest might have a little smile on his face. Mark Meckler is the co-founder and president of the Convention of States. He was actually going to stop by and talk about the IRS swamp scandal. We'll get to that. Mark, welcome to the program. But good golly.
Merry Christmas. That's what I have to say.
You know, so last week, Mark, and maybe you felt the same way, I finally looked at some of this stuff and I said, you know, because I've been calling ever since Tulsi Gabbard said, look, we've got all of this. And then Grassley said, look at all of this. And I said, man, we have got to get straight to a grand jury. Don't need any special prosecutors. We've got the evidence. Let's get right to it. And they're doing it. And I thought to myself, for the first time, people could actually go to prison for committing actual crimes that are serious. Mark, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I've been waiting for this for a very long time. It's always frustrated me, and I've kind of come to ignore congressional committees and subpoenas and all that stuff because I just knew there were going to be no consequences. And so when all this stuff started coming out, that was my only question is, this is interesting, it's theater, but will there be consequences? And if there aren't, then frankly, I think the process itself is destructive because it sets expectations. But now it looks like there actually might be consequences. I agree with you. I think they're going to impanel that grand jury in Florida, which means you'll get an actual impartial grand jury instead of some crazy DC grand jury. It looks like some people may actually pay a price for wrongdoing, and that's a great thing for the Republic.
Yeah, it really is, you know, and I don't know how far it's going to go, and it's going to be very divisive. Of course, you know, you watch MSNBC, you watch Chicken Noodle News if you have to, and they're talking about Epstein. This is just a distraction from Epstein. There's no evidence here. No evidence? Are they kidding? What do you mean no evidence? Tulsi Gabbard laid it out. Chuck Grassley exposed it all. The annex, you know, the burn bags. The Kash Patel and his team at the FBI found in a secret room in the back somewhere. Evidence, we've got literally sacks full of evidence, don't we?
We do, and you know, the media that you're quoting, these are the same people that told us that the Russia collusion hoax was real, that the Steele dossier was real, that this was all some sort of crazy conspiracy theory, that any of this stuff was cooked up. So these are people who've lied to us literally now for many, many, many years. The fact that anybody listens to them anymore shows what kind of a bubble they live in, and I think that bubble gets smaller by the day.
You know how they always used to say, the walls are closing in on Donald Trump? No, you got that wrong. The walls aren't closing in. It just doesn't happen to be on him because all of these documents that have been declassified and put out for all to see now, that's evidence. And the grand jury is going to see all of this. I don't know who the prosecutor is. I don't know if we'll know for a while because they'll try to keep that under wraps. At some point it'll leak, but we'll see where this goes. All right, so let's talk about the Internal Revenue Service. The IRS commissioner has suspended some top Obama-era officials, and I want you to weigh in on this, Mark. Tell us why this is happening and why it is so important.
Well, a little context. It's particularly important to me. I was one of the people that founded Tea Party Patriots, the largest Tea Party organization in the country. I watched a lot of my colleagues around the country get targeted by the IRS, abused by the IRS, audited by the IRS because they were Tea Party folks or constitutional folks. And Lois Lerner was at the head of that, this exempt organizations division. She sadly is now retired, living on a full government pension and never paid any price for this. Holly Paz and her compatriot, who are now have been put on administrative leave, were two of the people that we actually deposed during our litigation against the IRS. I knew exactly what they did. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew it was unconstitutional. They knew they were silencing their fellow Americans, and they did it with impunity anyway. And though this is 10 years too late, I'm glad to see some justice perhaps finally being done.
Now, with Lois Lerner, obviously she was somebody who targeted any conservative organization. I mean, it didn't matter who you were. They wouldn't fill out the paperwork. They wouldn't give you your status. They wouldn't do a whole host of things. But she's beyond the statute of limitations, yes or no?
Yeah, she is. And the thing is, she's retired. So what they're doing to these two ladies right now is not prosecuting. They put them on administrative leave. I hope ultimately it does lead to prosecution. I do think a lot of these crimes would be beyond the statute of limitations. So I think the best we can do is deprive them of their jobs and deprive them of their federal pensions.
So could Lois Lerner, because she's beyond the statute of limitations, therefore there's no crime to be confessed to, could she be compelled to testify behind closed doors, under oath, whatever, because she doesn't face any penalty? She can't hide behind the Fifth Amendment. I would think but you might know better.
Yeah, she could be compelled to testify. And I think, again, to sanitize this whole thing is to bring it out in the light of day. And I think she needs to be compelled to testify. There's a lot of records. We got a lot of them in our litigation against the IRS. We know exactly who was involved. All of these people should be forced to testify publicly, and they should be forced to tell the whole truth. If we don't do that, then the IRS will never be cleaned up. And frankly, I don't think the IRS will ever be totally cleaned up anyway. I think we need to restructure our tax system and get rid of the IRS.
No, I agree with that. I think a flat tax is something I've agreed with ever since Steve Forbes came out with that. How many decades ago was that? I've agreed with it then. I agree with it now. Look, integrity in our institutions is something is what you're touching on here, Mark. And I think that is, you cannot overstate how important that is. And that's why everything we've talked about here today, the Pam Bondi putting together a grand jury, James Comer sending subpoenas to Bill and Hillary Clinton and others, holding Lois Lerner accountable, whether or not we can prosecute her. But the only way you return integrity and put faith back in the institutions of this country, whether it's the FBI, the IRS, or a host of other alphabet agencies, is to hold people accountable, including prosecutions. Agree or disagree?
I absolutely agree. And this is a fundamental problem in our republic right now is people don't trust the institutions for good reason. We've seen the proof over and over across way more than even a decade, but certainly my 15 years in politics, I don't trust the institutions. And the reason is there's a 2-tiered or 3-tiered system of justice, especially if you're a powerful, connected Democrat. If you do things wrong and those things target conservatives, not only do you not get punished for those things, you generally get rewarded. If you're in the next administration, you'll go on to a higher position. One thing that most people don't know about Lois Lerner is she got in trouble previously in another part of the administration for targeting Christians. And for doing so, she got elevated and moved up in the IRS, just took a job in another part of an administration. So what we need to do is make sure that these people pay a price. They should be shamed. They should pay a societal price. They should be paid criminal prices, maybe civil fines. But I think one of the most important things we can do is drag them out in public and make them tell the truth.
Let me ask you this, Mark. If we're able to get to a Convention 5, Convention of States, something you hold near and dear to your heart, would some of these things be things that could be discussed and included in adjustments? And I don't mean wholesale changes to the Constitution. Adjustments here and there would be what we need in this country. Maybe a balanced budget line in there. Holding officials accountable if you do these things, certain things that should be maybe enumerated in the Constitution more robustly, because there are certain things that the founders could not anticipate. Got about 20 seconds. Real quick, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to be real specific and go to this income tax issue in the IRS. The framers never intended there to be a direct taxation relationship with the citizens of the country and the federal government. We should do away with that.
Right.
We should do away with the IRS. That's something we can do in an Article 5 convention.
Mark Meckler, greatly appreciate you being here. Great conversation. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Steve.
This is Steve.
See some justice after what happened. Who remembers Lois Lerner and the IRS scandal, right? Where they were slow walking after this Tea Party, major grassroots Tea Party movement just grows out of nowhere. All these Tea Party organizations and groups were blowing up everywhere. And Obama's IRS and Lois Lerner decided to slow walk it in order to, and ultimately it was all about controlling the outcome of the elections by slow walking and stopping this grassroots movement. Well, it's back in the news now as 2 holdovers who have continued at the IRS, who were actively involved in that IRS scandal, have suddenly been placed on leave. And here to discuss is somebody who actually had a front row seat to the abuse that went on, and he actually was involved. And it's Mark Meckler, an American political commentator, attorney, and president of the convention and co-founder of Convention of States. And he joins me now. Hey, Mark Meckler, welcome to the Andrea Kaye Show.
Thanks. It's good to be with you.
All right. So I was surprised that this was back in the news. I was surprised because I was surprised that there were still some holdovers from what happened at the IRS. So I'm not sure if I accurately summarized what happened, Mark Meckler. So if you could remind everybody the egregious behavior by the IRS and what your role was in that and where we need to see accountability going forward.
Sure. So back in 2009, 2010, the Tea Party movement starts up. We have the largest sweep in Congress between parties. 62 seats that were formerly Democrat go to Republican. That's the largest since 1938. Great success. And so the Tea Party groups all over the country, really over 2,000 of them, are growing. They're strong, and they're trying to figure out how they operate. And remember, these are just mom and pop groups. They don't know anything about being a nonprofit or setting up organizations. So people started advising them that they need to go out and get their nonprofit status from the IRS. And so hundreds and hundreds of these groups started applying for that status. And the IRS then decides to choke down on this. Actually, President Obama himself came out in public and said something like, I think some of these groups might be abusing their charitable status. Mm-hmm. Maybe the IRS ought to look into that. Of course, he claims he didn't tell anybody to do anything. And then, amazingly, the IRS begins clamping down on that. Lois Lerner was the lead person over that, Holly Paz. And so these women were in charge of putting together what they call the BOLO list, be on the lookout list. And these lists literally just said, if a group has Tea Party in the name of it, then you need to slow walk that, and you need to choke that down. And I was right at the center of it. I had friends all over the country in the Tea Party movement, and a lot of these folks were leading these groups for my friends. My local group in Northern California got choked down like this, and they put together a list of something like 40 demands that these people had to have. Things like, we want to know the content of your prayers. We want to know every book you've recommended people read. We want the content of every speech that's ever been made. I mean, these were outrageous, unconstitutional demands, and the entire point was to choke that movement down so that it would be less successful in 2012. And indeed, they were successful at that.
Yeah, they were. I'm flashing on, it's been a while since I reviewed this story, but I'm flashing on tax returns being illegally exposed as well.
Yeah, I mean, not just exposed. It is illegal for the federal IRS, these agencies, to cooperate with local states to give them information. We have lots of friends who got flagged by the IRS. They got audited by the IRS personally, and then they got audited at the state level as well. Mm-hmm. For example, in California by the Franchise Tax Board. So, yeah, they were doing everything they could to traumatize, terrorize, and shut these groups down. And a lot of them ceased to exist because of this.
Yeah, and I can remember being really angry at how feckless the Republican Party was in handling this, because this was a scandal that 60%, and this was long before we even knew what we know now in terms of the deep state and the weaponization of the government targeting citizens for their political views. This was kind of the first time that we really felt that 60% of Americans were outraged when they found this out, because if there is one agency or department that unanimously, or pretty much all Americans can agree on that they despise and fear, it's the IRS. It's the only department that can consider you guilty until you prove your innocence. And so the majority of the American people were like, this is outrageous that we've got the IRS just going after these groups and behaving in such a manner. And they had the typical Republican hearings, and nothing was done. Nobody was held accountable. Lois Lerner is off somewhere, living fat and large off of her pensions, taxpayer-funded pensions. Her replacement, some man, didn't clean house, obviously. We still have 2 holdovers all these years later. Let's talk about accountability and what should happen going forward.
Yeah, there was no accountability. This is classic deep state. And in fact, I would argue it's the exact opposite of accountability. On the left, if you do something to persecute Christians, conservatives, anybody on the right, Republicans, you will find yourself promoted. You will find yourself, even if you happen to get in trouble on the off chance, you'll find yourself in another agency with a better job. And honestly, I think that culture still exists largely in the federal government. So to me, this is a harbinger, hopefully, of better things to come. We're starting to see President Trump, people are pointing out to him, hey, you still have people in the admin that have done really bad things. And he seems to be taking action. I was really shocked to hear this was going on. I heard at the beginning of the admin they might do this. It was something that I suggested they do, that these people who were in charge were people who should be taken care of. But I would add it goes much deeper than this, because you have to remember, it wasn't 3 women that did all of this. There were literally dozens and dozens of employees who were involved. All of them knew it was wrong. All of them knew this was unconstitutional. They would use the excuse that, well, I was just doing my job. But that excuse shouldn't fly. And anybody who touched this stuff and didn't complain about it and wasn't a whistleblower, they should all be gone.
Yeah, because this involved offices all across this country. I can remember some in Ohio because I have family in Ohio at the time. This is a reminder, too, of the idea of and the excuses some conservative commentators were making involving the FBI and the DOJ, the Russian collusion. Oh, it's just a few people at the top. No, this goes deep and wide. And the only name that we ever really got was Lois Lerner. And now we're seeing Holly Paz, Elizabeth Katzenberg. Nobody who had their fingers at all on any file or any involvement whatsoever should have been allowed to continue in the U.S. government. And it's not enough for me that they be put on administrative leave. I want these people prosecuted for their abuse of power.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. At the time, I actually helped to lead a lawsuit against the IRS, ultimately settled in a multi-million-dollar settlement. That wasn't enough. One, I don't want taxpayer dollars going to pay for this. These people should have been personally liable. We tried to do that. The courts would not allow it. But I actually think they should be in jail. I mean, to me, it was sort of a life quest for me. Lois Lerner is out there, as you said, living fat and happy on a government pension. At best, she should be working at a McDonald's, and really, she should be in an orange jumpsuit somewhere.
Absolutely. How can people follow you and see all your work, Mark Meckler?
Yeah, they can go to conventionofstates.com, or they can follow me personally at Mark Meckler on X.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's just a shock that these people are still at the IRS. And it's also a reminder that because nobody paid a price at that point, it just enabled the deep state, and the administrative state to just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we're all suffering. And it's all tied to like the DOJ and the FBI and the Russian collusion hoax. So accountability is how we end this. Thank you for being here, Mark Meckler. I appreciate it.
Mark Meckler is sitting by in the Middleton Ford hotline. Mark, I have a question for you. You're from Texas, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, before we dive into our topic du jour, what in the heck? Did they all just say, hey, I remember something weird happening in Wisconsin where a whole bunch of Democrats fled to the state of Illinois to deny a quorum. Did they did somebody watch some old documentary on the recall Scott Walker efforts here?
I can't give your Democrats all the credit because we actually our Democrats have done this before. It's not the first time that they've done it. It is about as weak and pathetic a response as you could possibly do. Instead of staying there and debating and fighting it out and taking your lumps, which is what you got to do when you're the minority, they ran away. And amazingly and ironically, they ran to protest gerrymandering, and they ran to the most gerrymandered state in the United States of America, Governor Pritzker's state of Illinois.
Yes. It's 100% true. If you got to look at a heat map of Illinois, a political heat map of Illinois. It's all red. The whole state, it's a big state. It's all red, except for Chicago and Rockford. It's all red. Two cities in that state are the reason why it is the dysfunctional, nightmare taxation and reality, denying nightmare that it is.
Yeah, I would add it's also run by Jabba the Hutt. So, you can't be too surprised that you're getting any evil out of that administration.
Isn't that something, though? And so the whole point about this is we want fair maps. No, you don't. You want your maps. That's what Gavin Newsom is now. Gavin Newsom, Kathy Hochul, they're all like, we're going to blow up the maps and we're going to gerrymander our states even more aggressively than they already are. And, and there's the press happily repeating that that's the way it went. That's the way it's going to have to be. I hope your governor is as tough as he's been talking. And, someone goes and drags them back in handcuffs. That's what we were hoping we would have done back in 2011. Alas, it went on for 6 weeks. So
yeah, I'm all in favor of that, and we'll see what happens. But I think, look, our governor is talking pretty tough right now. He does have a habit of talking tough and acting much more weakly than that. But I think he's going to move forward. I think this redistricting is going to take place. It's going to take place along the lines they've already drawn it. And by the way, I want to clarify, California already gerrymandered. Illinois already gerrymandered. New York and all these places, they already gerrymandered. Even if they wanted to redo it, it's very difficult because they've already done it almost to the maximum allowable
Yes.
or possible. So it's just, they don't have a lot more to gain.
No, they don't. I'm not sure what you can do. It'll be interesting to see what the new census produces, particularly for the state of California. Let's talk about the IRS. We finally had a suspension of people who were part of the process back when Barack Obama was president, who were targeting groups like yours, targeted me, for heaven's sakes, little old, me, little Tea Party radio person. I got audited by the IRS. And so I can't believe it's taken this long to clean house.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that it has, because one of my great frustrations always about the federal government is it doesn't matter who's in charge, nobody's held accountable. Depending on who's in charge, you have hearings that go one way or the other, and they're mostly theater, and in the end, mostly nothing happens. And so that really frustrates me. Lois Lerner was one of the ringleaders of all this. Actually, I think it went all the way up to Barack Obama, but Lois Lerner on the ground, she ends up retiring with a full retirement package, no penalties or punishments for what she did to people like you and me and all our Tea Party friends. These two gals are still at the IRS, still in high-level positions. So I really have to give them credit. Thank God they're actually going to do something. They're willing to reach back 10 years and punish these people more than 10 years for the unconstitutional efforts to silence their fellow citizens. I'm happy that it's happening. It's not enough yet. I'd like to see them stripped of their pensions. I would like to see them booted out unceremoniously with their personal belongings in a box down to the curb. We'll see what happens.
I want an investigation. I want a final investigation into this, because we never got much of an investigation. We got an inspector general's report. We got some desk pounding, some speechifying for C-SPAN, but we didn't really get an investigation. Here's why. Lois Lerner was in communication with Kevin Kennedy of the Government Accountability Board here in Wisconsin while this was going on. Kevin Kennedy launched the John Doe investigations, which were going after political donations, you name it, tax records, everything. I want to know if there is, because we believe there is, I want to know if there is a federal nexus between the IRS targeting the FBI and the state of Wisconsin during the John Doe investigations, because what that did was obliterate the conservative network in Wisconsin, and we've never been the same since. So, I want some final answers here. It's good to see people finally getting fired, but maybe we've got some enterprising folks who are still willing to ask these questions, because I believe this was directed with a hand by the federal government.
Yeah, and I think that's more than a rational belief. I think that there's a likelihood of that. I think you and I have both seen some evidence of that. I think that it was directed by the FBI in Washington, D.C. I think the orders came down from D.C. to crack down in Wisconsin.
Yes.
Governor Walker was a danger to the status quo. He had overturned the status quo. Act 10 had changed everything on the ground in Wisconsin. It changed the state of political play, and it was going to be the model for the rest of the country. And so I think that those in Washington, D.C., in a place of power, realized they had to do everything possibly could to thwart that, and indeed they did.
I think so too. It was the network that was the most important thing. That was really their target. They hated Scott Walker just like they hated Donald Trump, but it was about the network. When the IRS started targeting groups like yours or True the Vote or some of these other, Rock River Patriots, I remember here in Wisconsin, when they started targeting those people, that was meant so that we had an incredibly successful, well-oiled network in Wisconsin that was producing consistent conservative results for our state. And part of it was built on the old Colorado model way back in the day. We saw people wanting to recreate that network in other states. I truly believe that the IRS said, we can't let that happen. We cannot let these nonprofits come on board. We can't let these 501c3s or 501c4s sign on. No way. And someone's got to start scratching the surface of this, because I think that we've barely begun to understand just how deep the deep state goes, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. When you talk about the network, I do think that was the most important thing, not just in Wisconsin, but nationally. With the Tea Party movement, we had a national network.
Yes.
They hated that network, and they wanted to crack down every bit of it. And when I say every bit of it, I mean that went from the highest level donors, whatever donors might have been participating, all the way down to local Tea Party groups. My local group was persecuted. It's the network, and they just can't afford to let those networks exist. I think we live in an alternative time now where we can't afford to let their networks exist, and we need to go after them with the same ferocity that they came after us. If I was president right now, the first thing I would be doing is instructing my DOJ and my FBI to go into every Soros-related organization to seize every computer, every piece of communication equipment, just like they did to my friend James O'Keefe. You don't have to charge them with a crime. You just say the same thing they said to James. We're doing an investigation. And just seize all those materials that would disrupt the networks. And I guarantee you there's a treasure trove of information in there indicating the commission of anti-American crimes.
I agree with you entirely. I don't think James ever got a full accounting of what they were looking for specifically. I think he was still getting redacted information up until just a few months ago, trying to get all of the information associated with the raid that he experienced. You know, we had people who are still gun shy about participating in politics again. That's, by the way, that's lawfare 1.0. What we saw in Wisconsin, what you experienced, the targeting of Tea Party groups, large Tea Party groups, small Tea Party groups. That's lawfare 1.0. This is lawfare 2.0 that we're in now, where now the federal government is funneling money into NGOs through USAID for specific political purposes. I'm so with you on investigating Soros because we know Leonard Bernardo was working directly with Hillary Clinton's campaign to push the Russia collusion hoax. In Wisconsin, everybody forgets this, in Wisconsin back in 2012, the accusation was coordination, which isn't even a crime, but it was coordination. The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel lit its hair on fire over coordination. You've got declassified information that says not only was there coordination, there was full direction of a campaign by a foreign NGO.
Yeah, I mean, this is as bad as it gets, and I think this sort of corruption puts the republic at risk, and it leads to ultimately to violence. Because if this is the way the government's going to go, the government's entirely illegitimate.
Yep.
It's funny, Vicki, I don't read a lot of fiction. I am reading a book right now. I'm reading Kurt Schlichter's latest book, which is called American Apocalypse, which is a fictional history of the Second American Revolution. And if you read that book, what you'll find is that it's not intended to be a predictor, but it's intended to show what can happen from the kind of actions that we're talking about. And it's very scary.
Yeah, he recommends you read it as historical fiction.
Yes,
because that's exactly what it is. Mark Meckler, where can people find more about you, about your organizations, Convention of States? We're still working on that across the country. Where can people learn more?
On X at Mark Meckler, and they can follow Convention of States by going to conventionofstates.com.
Okay, conventionofstates.com. Meckler with a C-K-L-E-R and Mark with a K. Thank you, Mark, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Good to have you. Thank you, Middleton Fort.